welcome to this special broadcast right here on NDTV. Now, if you watch TV news, political reportage, if you've ever come to Delhi as a tourist, you've seen on TV the 26th January parade, you would know where exactly I'm standing. Right behind me is the Rashtrapati Bhavan. Then you've got the North Block, South Block, the Parliament to the left, and this road on which I'm walking is the Rajpath on which the parade happens. This is a matter of great pride for India. We flaunt this area. It's a tourist destination, it's a tourist attraction. But this was a legacy of the British Raj. It's over 100 years old. And now, if the government is to be believed, they want to Indianize this further. They want to make changes to the central Vista, to the Parliament, to the government offices here, the secretariat, to Indianize it. So what exactly is the central hub of the Lutyens zone built by Sir Edward Lutyens about 100 years ago is going to look like? How will the government reimagine the Lutyens zone?
The year 1911, when Delhi got a major upgrade. A city which till then was known for its Mughal grandeur and stories of the erstwhile Indraprasth was just about to get a British makeover. Three main corridors linked the old city to the new government complexes. Jama Masjid, Indraprasth on the other, and the Safdarjung tomb. The job handed over to this man, British architect Sir Edwin Lutyens. His job to design a world-class capital as the British moved India's seat of power from the then Calcutta to the modern-day national capital. It still retains its name given back then, New Delhi. The new district of New Delhi was designed and built out of scratch. Sir Lutyens' task included imagining a whole new city. This involved 4 bungalows in the Viceroy House, the modern-day Rashtrapati Bhavan, and the town planning and layout of a brand new city. Lutyens Delhi covers an area of approximately 26 square kilometers. There are close to 1,000 bungalows which fall under the categorization used till date, Lutyens Bungalow Zone or the LBZ. Thick patches of green adjoin the LBZ even today. These bungalows were for British officers and senior government functionaries of the Raj. The greens between the crowded walled city was to isolate the manicured gardens and grand buildings from the chaos of the old city, a legacy India's politicians now enjoy. Lutyens Delhi was geometrical, roads hexagonal, converging into roundabouts. After independence, all administrative buildings came to be used by the Indian state. This included those in the central Vista, Rashtrapati Bhavan, north in the South Block as the secretariat, all the way up to India Gate. It's the central Vista, Parliament and government offices which have remained unchanged for over 100 years. That the Modi government now wants upgraded, a mega plan which is being made to give the Prime Minister's New India a new identity.
So there's great curiosity, not just among the general public who've been reading about a possible change, but also town planners and historians as to how the government proposes to rewrite the history of the Central Vista, government offices, as well as the other changes that they want to make. So I've got these two gentlemen with me. One is a town planner, Mr. A.K. Jain. Thank you very much for speaking to NDTV. And we've got Mr. Shashank Sinha as well. Thank you very much. You are a historian, an author, as well as someone who will have a lot to know and say about the history of this place and possibly the future. Thank you very much to both of you. Mr. Jain, let me begin with you. Why did this place come about? What was the original idea?
In 1911, when the capital of India used to be Calcutta, there was a Delhi Darbar which was held in December 1911. And in this Delhi Darbar, King George V announced that the capital of India will shift from Calcutta to Delhi. And he also said that it should be one of the most magnificent and beautiful capitals of the world, where the glory of British Empire could be reflected. So the best of the architects were engaged. Edwin Lutyens was the initial architect, and he also brought together with him Herbert Baker, who was working on government building projects in Pretoria, South Africa.
And that's what is known as the Lutyens zone.
Yeah.
Well, his legacy is still on. I mean, it lives on. We've seen it's been kept well also by the government. So I would presume that he was a visionary. Now, Shashank, what was the logic and the reasoning behind putting all these buildings together? Obviously, there would have been a lot of method to the way this has been done. For instance, the Parliament here, the South Block and the North Block, the Viceroy House, which has now become the Rashtrapati Bhavan, this particular stretch all the way to India Gate.
There was a particular reason why this site called Reimagining Hill was chosen. So they had decided, in spite of their differences about architectural style, both Lutyens and Baker and Harding, who was the head of the, who was the viceroy of this place, they had all decided that they'll be going in for Western classical architecture, and the Indian motifs would be used mainly for decorative purposes. That was an element there. Now the Reimagining Hill was a hill which was chosen to be some kind of an Indian acropolis, and the Viceroy's house was supposed to be some kind of a Parthenon over this Indian acropolis. So there was a very strong political symbolism that was going on at the choice of this site.
Let's talk about the transition of power. We'll get to town planning a little later, the modern day town planning, but let's get to that transition of power. I would say that was pretty smooth. Like this immediately became India's seat of power.
Delhi was considered as a garden city originally by Lutyens. Garden city means that 1/3 of the area of Delhi is
Will be gardens.
under the greens or the trees, and no building except in the central vista, that means India Gate, Viceroy House and secretariats and Parliament House will be higher than the tree. The tree height was assumed to be 50 feet. So even Connaught Place was kept below 50 feet. So the visual linkages were created from Parliament House to Jama Masjid, which was a little disturbed now because of multi-story buildings coming up. So this was the status, but it was very upsetting for the Prime Minister that we are going for refugee rehabilitation in a very ad hoc manner. We don't have a master plan. And he created Delhi Development Authority to create a master plan for Delhi. And then the master plan exercise was taken up, and everyone appreciated and recognized the need to conserve this new Delhi, which was not only a pride for Delhi but a pride for India.
What all happened inside Parliament? Which building became what?
There are three buildings, basically, right? So one, there are three semicircular buildings connected to a central chamber, central assembly hall, through lobbies, So the Central Assembly Hall is known for the famous Tryst with Destiny speech.
Tryst with Destiny speech. And I think that was the first point where this building was Indianized.
That is the first point when this building, but later paintings were added, later smaller, structures were added to it, to ensure that the Indianization was went out. Plus, two of those buildings, semicircular buildings, one became the Lok Sabha, one became the Raj Sabha, and the third was used for the central library purposes, which was the Princes, Chamber of Princes, which was terminated in 1947. So they adapted to the new role of this thing. The third part, which was very, very interesting, was the whole idea of development of New Delhi also followed a similar architectural style. So the new town planning that went on in the 1950s and 60s conformed to the existing town plan that was set up by Lutyens and this thing. There were a fair share of problems. I agree with Dr. John. There were ideas about the greening of the city. Sooner the problems were coming in because they had planned it horizontally, not vertically. So horizontally means the space would get limited as well. So sooner the current problems that are emerging are partly also related to it.
This corridor of power is now getting old, or maybe cannot sustain the functioning of a modern day government, if you were. This needs change, right? Now, obviously, tenders are being invited, the proposals are being invited, so we don't know what the plan is. But what would you propose? Say, for instance, if tomorrow you were to get a call that come and please renovate this or change this. How should the government go about? I mean, most certainly you wouldn't want to raise this structure. It's beautiful.
This reminds me of 70s when there was a very strong lobby of the property dealers, and they wanted that this central business district, CBD, Connaught Place, should be enlarged and should be put up with the multi-story buildings. As a result, on Kasturba Gandhi Marg, Barakhamba Road and Janpath, you see these multi-story buildings. But the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was very upset. She said that Connaught Place has a very composite design and a very composite kind of architecture. So why you are spoiling this with competing buildings? One is round, one is low, one is high. This is not the way for good town planning. So conserve it, and ultimately in 1988 an order was issued that in Lutyens Bungalow zone, which includes Connaught Place and all these areas, the height of the buildings, the floor area, that means footprint of the building, and the FAR will remain the same even if it is getting dilapidated. If you have to reconstruct, you can't reconstruct like this. And the FAR of 400 was lowered to 150.
Okay.
So that means the buildings which were going 20-story high were maximum 6 or 8-story high. So this was done, and a lot of people went to the Supreme Court and High Court and everywhere. But in the meantime, the DDA incorporated these things as part of the master plan and zonal plan of Zone D, and nothing happened. So this was considered a first beginning of the conservation of the legacy of the heritage, and I think this has become a very heritage value. So whatever requirements of the MPs or the space requirements are,
they have to conform to building into that legacy rather than breaking and building a new one.
And maybe inside, if there are some changes, rooms can be subdivided.
No, but what if India gets a new parliament?
No, there is no need for a new parliament, because you have parliament annexed, you have the Balyogi auditorium where we have a parliament library.
So you're saying there's enough space inside?
And then we have this Chelmsford Club, we have the Constitution Club. So these buildings can be all together designed in an integrated manner and become part of the parliament if you require space. But from my point of view, the heritage, the architectural style of parliament should be conserved, should be preserved.
I think that's an important point, and this is the point that you were making just a short while ago, that the world over, the history is that Parliament House is not just a building, it's actually legacy and heritage. And the world over, countries have preserved it rather than... I mean, I'm not saying that the government plans to raise this building and build a new one. That's not, at least that's not the proposal that I've heard. Number one, what have you heard? And secondly, what has been the world model?
Two things. First, about the point about, there has not been a very, very clear directive so far. So they are basically, as of now,
if you could tell us, what have you heard?
There are three things, basically that I could, infer upon. One is the idea of, as they said, idea of a new parliament or a redevelopment of the existing parliament on very modern lines and high-tech lines. So that's what been said, so that the 75th, Indian Independence Day celebrations are held there, in the new parliament, which is 2022. That is part one. Second is the idea of what is they call CCS, the Common Central Secretariat, which would include all the 40 buildings. There are around 70,000 people, as per the reports floating in the media, working on, say, 47 ministry buildings, basically. So the whole idea is to have some kind of a common central secretariat. How that has to be done, that is not specified.
Can you have that? Can you have 70,000 people in one?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult because the way you have to fall into play in the way the Vista has been planned. And the third part is about the plan is there's this redevelopment of this central Vista.
Central Vista is from Rashtrapati
Bhavan to India Gate. So
okay.
Redevelopment of that. Now that was planned as imperial ceremonial boulevard, and it still becomes a very important socio-cultural space connected also to elements of national pride like the Republic Day parade and the beating retreat ceremony.
Correct.
Now, how do you plan to go about? Right now, yes, As of now, we do not know whether there is any desire or any clear reflection to raise down some of the buildings. That we not know. There is ambiguous. So far, we know that the request for proposal has been floated. CPWD has been meeting design and planning firms, and there is also, they say that they'll be backed up by a master plan, which would reflect the idea of a new and aspiring India, which will have good governance, accountability, which will have equity, and also within the milieu of the Indian cultural and social milieu. But then worldwide, when you look at it as well, people have been able to adapt to existing models, with some changes in between.
Yeah, give us the examples.
So the Dutch Parliament is actually a 13th century building. The Italian Parliament is 16th century. The French Parliament is a 17th century. 19th century, you have the US Parliament and the UK Parliament, Westminster, And 20th century, you have the newer nations, China, of course, is not a new nation, but China has this new building. India has this new building. Some of the African states became independent, have this new building. So world over, they're doing that. Now, there are two ways of looking at it. One way of looking at it would be to see whether this could be the modern architectural could beautifully blend with the existing architecture, right? And you have two examples, the Trafalgar Square in London and Champs-Élysées in France, basically, where you have this, they build this together, build it very harmoniously. So that is one point that remains to be seen. The other point is that, things become particularly complicated when the ideas of heritage is involved, when the ideas of history is involved. So when you do some substantial modifications, then what you could do is also you could modify or also perhaps erase history as well.
Why do you say that?
So with questions like that, because all of these monuments, have built, most of these monuments have built on some or other monument, across history you can see that. There have been several habitation layers across that, So once you say that, once you, do away with a particular building, you're trying to do away with a certain, period in history. A certain, period of grandeur in history, whatever. We may choose to define it, right? Like the way if you see the Mutiny Memorial. Now, Mutiny Memorial was initially built as a memorial for the soldiers who died fighting for the British in 1857. But the plaque was put up, there later, in 1970s. That look, it is an important heritage site for us, but it also was, something. It is a value of heritage for us. But then this was a Mutiny Memorial which was also there. So that's a very beautiful way of integrating with history. Especially having a separate plaque which is saying that this is British for British soldiers who died fighting for their regime as well. So there are different ways of how you integrate elements of past, specifying that. Likewise, when you make extensions to the monuments, you say this is the old extension, this is the new extension.
So you're saying don't erase history, add to the future what you want to leave as your legacy or the country wants to
add to the future.
Okay.
You can create your own legacy. That is interesting because even the British were very clear.
I think this should address all those concerns whether, there is a lot of doubt, frankly, at this moment, whether this Parliament House is going to stay or go, whether this Central Vista will stay or go, whether these buildings of North Block and South Block will be completely reimagined, what's going to happen on this stretch. I think you're addressing that question.
Yeah, I think, a part of it, the way you choose to integrate this is something which will be very important, and how you do that without completely doing away with the past, how they could be a harmonious construction, because, there is an important part in the history of the subcontinent which you continuously refer back to. And accommodating all those things, along this thing, you have to be very careful when you plan things like parking spaces, plan green spaces, you want to plan amenities around the Central Vista.
Essentially plan for the next 100 years.
Plan for the next 100. And you said it very rightly that, you can build, something new too. After all, the British also built, they were one agreement among the two planners and the Viceroy that it would reflect the imperial might of the British power. And they were very clear that all those buildings, at least Baker was very clear, is going to reflect the unity and law and order and the good government that has been brought up under the British. So once you have the idea of a new India, you can build a new idea, and there are certainly different ways of new idea. But I would say that it should not end up erasing history, but also peacefully coinciding with the existing histories.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Jain and Shashank. This was a lovely chat early this morning. Let's stop for a short break here at this moment. When we come back, we'll talk about that important building. We'll talk about Parliament House, its history and what could happen to it in the future. Back in a bit. Welcome back. You're watching Lutyens Reimagined. That building right behind me needs no introduction. It's the Indian Parliament. What a glorious past this building has. Now the government feels that the existing setup of this building, which was inherited from the British, is not enough to sustain the government's functioning. So what really is on the government's mind? What do they want to do? Do they want to remove this building and build a new one here? Do they want to get a new parliament complex somewhere else in the national capital? Will this then become a sort of a museum? We don't know. The government says that by 2022 all of this should be in place. Now that's a really short time to be building a brand new parliament. So what really is the government planning?
Indian Parliament, temple of democracy, witness to history.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge.
From the transfer of power to the many ups and downs of India's politics that followed over the past 7 decades. Even witness to a dastardly terror attack in 2001.
अभी भी आप सुन सकते हैं मेरे पीछे गोलियों की आवाज़ चल रही है। आप सुन सकते हैं, यहाँ पे देखिए ये पुलिस जो हमारे ओबी बैंक के पास गोलियों की आवाज़ बार बार अंदर से आ रही है। पुलिस यहाँ पे अपने पोजीशन लेके बैठी है, आप देख सकते हैं।
The building was designed in 1912 by Sir Edward Lutyens and Sir Herbert Baker. The construction began in 1921 and finished in 1927 when it was thrown open by Lord Irwin. Rail tracks were laid right up to the complex to ferry raw material. The iconic steam engine, the Fairy Queen, was tasked this job. The building is circular, based on the Ashok Chakra of the Indian flag. It consisted of a chamber of princes, now the Library Hall, the State Council, which after independence became the Upper House or the Rajya Sabha, the Central Legislative Assembly, which is now the Lower House or the Lok Sabha. The building is surrounded by large gardens and fenced by sandstone railings. Back in 1927, the cost of constructing Parliament was 80 lakh rupees. A need is being felt now that this complex in its present form may have outlived its utility. Suggestions have been coming in to either upgrade the existing complex or build a new parliament.
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री से हमने आग्रह किया है और हम कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि सभी माननीय सदस्यों से, यहाँ काम करने वाले सभी कर्मचारियों से, अधिकारियों से, राज्यसभा में काम करने वाले अधिकारी, कर्मचारी, वहाँ के सदस्य, सबके सुझाव आए इसके बारे में। और जो सुझाव आए उसके बाद टेक्निकल रूप से इस संसद के अंदर ही पुनः परिवर्तन होना चाहिए, नया बनना चाहिए, वह तकनीकी रूप से जो विचार विमर्श होगा उसके बाद निर्णय जो भी होगा, मुझे लगता है कि वो निर्णय इस संसद को आधुनिक और तकनीक युक्त बनाए और विश्व की सबसे आधुनिक तकनीकी संसद बने, ऐसा हमारा आग्रह और प्रधानमंत्री जी ने हमारे आग्रह को स्वीकार किया है।
The Prime Minister urged his government to look into this demand and thus laying the foundation stone of consultation and deliberation to give India a new parliament complex.
It's always a difficult task to reimagine and build on someone else's legacy. I mean, you can build your own, but you'll not be judged for what you've done in the past because you've just built it. But when you're reimagining someone else's legacy, there's always a reference point, a point of comparison. Well, the government is determined that this has to happen. How will it look? Well, 2022 is not really that far away. Thank you very much for watching this special presentation.